Emma had always known her mother, Margaret, as a woman of few words when it came to her past. Her stories were often vague, peppered with euphemisms and careful omissions that left Emma feeling like she was missing a vital piece of the puzzle. Growing up, she accepted these narratives as truth, never questioning the shadows that loomed over her mother's recollections. That was until one overcast Saturday afternoon when the mundane task of cleaning out the attic would forever alter her perception of her family. As Emma rummaged through the cluttered space filled with memories and relics of a bygone era, she felt a sense of nostalgia wash over her. Old toys, dusty books, and long-forgotten trinkets whispered stories from her childhood. But it was a battered cardboard box tucked away in a far corner that caught her eye. It seemed almost out of place among the other items, like an artifact waiting to be rediscovered. Curiosity piqued, Emma approached the box cautiously. With a gentle tug, she opened it, revealing an assortment of letters tied with fraying ribbon and faded photographs. The scent of old paper wafted into the air, a blend of time and memory. She sifted through the letters, each one telling a story of love and loss, but it was the photograph that truly captivated her attention. The image was worn at the edges but still retained a certain vibrancy. In it stood a young woman with striking features, her mother, Margaret, beaming with joy alongside a man Emma had never seen before. They were dressed in attire typical of decades past. Margaret's hair was styled in loose waves, and there was an undeniable spark in her eyes that Emma had never witnessed in her mother's current demeanor. The backdrop revealed a sunlit park adorned with blooming flowers and laughter frozen in time. Emma's heart raced as she leaned closer to examine the photograph. The two figures seemed so alive, so free from the burden of secrets that now hung heavy in her mother's silence. Who was this man? Why had her mother never mentioned him? Questions swirled in her mind like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. As she sat there surrounded by remnants of history, realization began to dawn on her. This photograph contradicted everything she thought she knew about her mother's past. Margaret had always painted herself as someone who led a simple life, devoted to family and focused on their well-being, but this image told a different story. It hinted at adventures untold and emotions unacknowledged. The weight of this discovery settled over Emma like a thick fog. She felt an unsettling mix of exhilaration and dread as she imagined what other truths lay buried beneath layers of silence and misdirection. The photograph was not just an image, it was a key that could unlock the hidden doors to her family's history. With growing determination, Emma decided she needed to confront her mother about this newfound evidence. She had spent years accepting half-truths and evasions, now it was time for clarity. But as she steeled herself for the confrontation ahead, doubt crept in. Would her mother be willing to share the truth? Would she even acknowledge the photograph? That evening, after dinner, Emma knew the moment had come. She found her mother sitting on the couch, engrossed in a book, a familiar scene that now felt oddly deceptive. Gathering her courage, Emma approached with the photograph clutched tightly in her hand. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "I found something today, something I think we need to talk about." Margaret looked up from her book, curiosity flickering across her face but quickly replaced by apprehension as she noticed the gravity in Emma's tone. "What is it?" she asked slowly. Emma held out the photograph, watching as confusion washed over her mother's features followed by an unmistakable flash of recognition. The silence stretched between them like an unspoken chasm filled with years of untold stories. "Who is he?" Emma asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. Margaret's expression hardened for just a moment before softening again. A mix of emotions played across her face like shadows dancing in candlelight. "Emma," she began, but words failed her as tears glistened in her eyes. In that moment, as she searched for answers amidst tangled memories and emotions laid bare, Emma felt both terrified and liberated. She understood that this conversation would shape not only their relationship but also how they viewed each other moving forward. What lay ahead would be an exploration into depths they had both avoided for too long, a journey shaped by love yet fraught with pain and discovery. The photograph had become more than just an image. It was a turning point, an invitation to uncover realities hidden beneath layers of lies that had defined their lives for years. As they sat together in that dimly lit room surrounded by echoes of silence and unspoken truths, Emma felt hope intermingled with uncertainty. A hope that perhaps understanding could bridge the gap between them and pave the way for healing stories long silenced by fear and shame. Emma sat in the living room, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hands. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Her heart raced as she stared at the image of her mother, young, vibrant, and undeniably happy, standing next to a man who was a complete stranger to her. The scene felt surreal, like a dream she couldn't shake off. She could scarcely comprehend what this meant for everything she thought she knew about her mother and their family. Her mind swirled with questions that threatened to overwhelm her. Who was this man? Why had her mother never mentioned him? Did he play a significant role in her life? Each question felt like a pebble dropped into a pond, sending ripples of doubt through Emma's understanding of her mother's past. The stories Margaret had shared over the years suddenly felt inadequate, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Emma's thoughts raced back to her childhood, to the countless times she had asked her mother about her life before marriage. Margaret had always responded with vague replies, "Oh, I had a simple upbringing," or "those days were nothing special." Yet here was irrefutable evidence that those days were anything but ordinary. This photograph shattered the carefully constructed narrative Emma had accepted for so long. She glanced up at her mother, who was still staring at the photograph with an expression Emma could not decipher. Was it guilt, fear, or perhaps sadness? The silence stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm, filled with unsaid words and buried memories. Emma's eyes darted back to the photograph. The man stood beside her mother with an arm draped casually over her shoulders, his smile warm and inviting. It seemed genuine, unlike the guarded demeanor Margaret often displayed when discussing her past. Confusion twisted inside Emma like a knot that refused to unravel. "Mom," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "who is he?" Margaret took a deep breath, and for a moment, Emma thought she might finally receive the answers she sought. But instead, her mother merely shook her head, emotion washing over her features as if she were battling an internal storm. "I can't explain right now," Margaret replied, her voice shaky yet resolute. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Emma echoed incredulously. "You've been lying to me my whole life. How can it be complicated?" The frustration bubbled up inside her as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. With every word spoken in that quiet room, she felt the foundations of trust begin to crack beneath her. Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she struggled to find the right words, a struggle Emma could feel acutely. "I didn't want you to know," she finally admitted, looking away as if unable to face the truth she had hidden for so long. "Didn't want me to know what?" Emma pressed on, desperation creeping into her voice. "That you were someone else before you became my mother? That there are parts of your life you've kept from me? What else have you concealed?" The questions tumbled out like a torrent that couldn't be controlled. Every answer felt vital yet elusive, as if they were being snatched away by shadows in the corners of their home, a home where honesty should have thrived but instead now felt tainted by deception. Margaret remained silent for what felt like an eternity before finally speaking again. "I did it to protect you," she whispered. The words hung heavy in the air between them. "Protect me from what?" Emma shot back, anger surging through her veins. "From knowing who you really are? From understanding where I come from?" She watched as Margaret's face fell, realizing too late that this conversation was dredging up painful memories for both of them. The truth was raw and unsettling, there was no way around it. "I thought I could shield you from my past," Margaret said softly, regret lacing each syllable. "There are things I didn't want you to carry. But I'd rather carry your truth than live in this lie." Emma exclaimed fiercely. It felt liberating to voice what had been simmering inside of her, a desire for authenticity over illusion. The tension in the room was palpable as they faced each other across an emotional divide that seemed insurmountable. Emma could see the flicker of fear in Margaret's eyes, fear of judgment, fear of exposure, fear of losing the daughter who stood before her now questioning everything she'd ever built. "This photograph changes everything," Emma stated firmly. "I need answers not just about him but about you." As she spoke those words, something shifted in the air between them. It was as if they both understood that this moment marked a turning point, the beginning of a journey they would either face together or apart. Margaret sighed deeply and wiped away a stray tear that rolled down her cheek. Emma noticed how fragile her mother seemed in that instant, a woman burdened by secrets but still fiercely protective of her daughter. "I will tell you everything," Margaret promised at last, words escaping as if released from years of captivity. "But it won't be easy." Emma nodded slowly, though uncertainty still loomed ahead like dark clouds on the horizon. She felt an ember of hope ignite within her heart, a hope that they could navigate this uncharted territory together and emerge stronger on the other side. The photograph lay between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed, a reminder that truth could be painful yet liberating all at once. In that moment of connection born from confusion and vulnerability, both women understood. Sometimes facing the past is necessary to reclaim their future together. The air was thick with tension as Emma sat across from her mother at the kitchen table, the photograph still resting between them like a fragile truce. The once familiar warmth of their home felt altered, charged with unspoken words and questions that hung like heavy curtains. Emma's heart raced as she prepared for what she knew would be a difficult conversation, one that would peel back layers of deception and force her mother into the light. "Mom," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions churning inside her. "I need you to be honest with me about everything. This photograph, who is that man? Why have you kept him from me?" Margaret's gaze flickered to the photograph before quickly darting away as if the very mention of it burned her. "Emma, please," she replied defensively, her tone laced with an urgency that struck Emma as desperate. "You don't understand what you're asking." "No," Emma interjected firmly. "I think I do understand. This isn't just about a picture, it's about my entire understanding of you and my family. I've grown up believing one thing, only to find out there's a whole other side to your life that you've hidden from me." Margaret leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms tightly over her chest as if guarding herself against an invisible attack. "I didn't hide it because I wanted to deceive you," she said sharply, her voice rising slightly. "I did it to protect you. There are things in my past that are painful, things I didn't want you to carry." "Painful?" Emma echoed incredulously. "But I deserve to know. If there's something in your past that affects who I am or where I come from, then it's my right to know about it." The confrontation had ignited something fierce within both of them, Emma's need for truth colliding with Margaret's instinct to shield her daughter from perceived harm. As silence enveloped the kitchen for a moment, Emma could see the inner conflict written across her mother's face. "Do you even realize what you're asking me to do?" Margaret finally said, her voice wavering slightly as she looked directly into Emma's eyes. "You want me to drag up memories that I've worked so hard to bury? You think it's easy to relive those moments?" Emma felt a pang of guilt tug at her heart, but she pushed through it. "I don't want this to be easy for you," she said softly but firmly. "I want you to be honest so we can figure this out together. We can't move forward without addressing the past." Margaret sighed heavily, the tension in her body seeming to ease for just a moment. But then she straightened up again, her defensive walls crashing back into place. "You think everything can just be fixed with a conversation? It doesn't work like that. Some truths are too painful to share. Then why did you keep this photograph?" Emma pressed on, gesturing toward the image that lay between them like an accusation. "If it holds no significance, why not just tell me? Why lie?" "I wasn't lying," Margaret snapped, frustration bubbling over as she ran a hand through her hair in exasperation. "I simply chose not to share everything. There's a difference." Emma felt an ember of anger flare within her again, the defensiveness in her mother's tone only fueled her determination for clarity. "But those choices have consequences. You've created a wall between us with your silence." Margaret paused, visibly wrestling with her emotions. The words hung in the air like storm clouds threatening rain, both women aware that they stood on the precipice of something significant but unsure of how far they were willing to go. "Emma," Margaret began cautiously, lowering her voice as if trying to draw Emma closer rather than push her away. "There are parts of my past that shaped who I am today, who we are today, but some of those pieces are filled with pain and regret." "I get that," Emma replied earnestly, feeling the tightness in her chest ease slightly at the softer tone. "But if we don't talk about them now, how can we ever heal? You've raised me to value honesty and transparency. But there are things I'm not ready to share," Margaret said softly but resolutely, shaking her head as though trying to ward off the memories that threatened to surface. "What about my right to know?" Emma pressed again but softened her tone this time, a plea instead of a demand. Margaret met Emma's gaze, and for a moment they simply existed together in silence, the weight of their shared history pressing heavily upon them both. "I know it feels unfair," Margaret finally conceded, anguish flickering in her eyes like candlelight caught in a breeze. "But some battles are hard-won and leave scars behind." "Scars aren't something we should hide from each other," Emma insisted gently. She could feel the urgency building within herself, the need not only for answers but also for connection. "I can't promise everything will make sense or feel right," Margaret murmured after another long pause, looking down at the table where their hands lay just inches apart, so close yet so distant. "Then let's at least start somewhere," Emma urged gently, reaching out towards her mother's hand before pulling back slightly in hesitation. Margaret breathed deeply, visibly weighing Emma's words before slowly nodding, a sign of reluctant agreement mixed with apprehension. "Okay," she finally said softly, almost hesitant but determined nonetheless. "But know this, it won't be easy for either of us." "I don't expect it will be," Emma replied earnestly, feeling a flicker of hope rise within her chest despite knowing they were embarking on a challenging journey. As their eyes locked once more across that kitchen table, filled with remnants of meals shared and laughter echoing in corners, Emma sensed they were poised on the brink of something transformative. An opportunity not only to unearth buried truths but also to strengthen their bond through vulnerability and understanding. The photograph had become more than just an artifact, it was now a bridge, a means by which they could traverse the treacherous waters ahead together and emerge on the other side with newfound clarity and connection. In the days that followed her tense confrontation with her mother, Emma's mind buzzed with questions that refused to be silenced. The photograph had unlocked a door she hadn't even known existed, and now she was determined to step through it. Each passing hour felt like a delicate tug-of-war between curiosity and anxiety, but the need for answers pushed her forward. Emma spent her evenings poring over the old box she had discovered in the attic. The letters and photographs inside now held a new significance, as each piece of paper seemed to whisper secrets about the life her mother had lived before becoming the woman who raised her. With every letter she read, every faded image she examined, Emma could feel the threads of her family's narrative begin to weave together, revealing a tapestry of hidden truths. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was addressed to her mother from a name Emma didn't recognize, Clara. The handwriting was elegant yet urgent, filled with emotions that leaped off the page. As she read through it, Emma's heart raced. Clara seemed to be someone significant in Margaret's life, someone who had shared intimate moments and profound connections. There were mentions of late-night talks, secrets kept, and an upcoming wedding that had been dashed by unforeseen circumstances. What wedding? Emma murmured to herself, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the words on the page. As she continued reading, it became clear that Clara wasn't just a friend, she was someone deeply intertwined with Margaret's past, someone whose existence had been carefully obscured. Emma felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as she realized this letter raised more questions than it answered. Who was Clara? What had happened to her? And why hadn't her mother ever mentioned her? Determined to dig deeper, Emma decided to visit the local library the next day. She hoped to find more information about Clara or any events related to her mother's past that might offer some clarity. Armed with a notebook and an open mind, she spent hours sifting through old newspapers and public records. The scent of aged paper enveloped her as she combed through articles that spanned decades. After countless searches yielded little fruit, Emma stumbled upon a small article tucked away in the community section of a newspaper from nearly 30 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman engaged in tragic accident." Her heart sank as she read about a car crash that took the life of a young woman named Clara Johnson just weeks before her wedding day. The details were sparse but heartbreaking. Clara had been beloved in their small town, known for her radiant smile and kind heart. Emma felt an ache in her chest as she absorbed the tragedy. Suddenly, Clara transformed from an abstract figure in a letter into a real person, a life cut short too soon. Emma's thoughts turned to her mother. How had Margaret coped with such loss? Did this tragedy play a role in shaping the woman Emma knew? As she left the library that day, clutching printed copies of articles and notes in her hand, she felt an overwhelming need to confront Margaret again, this time with new insights into the family history that had long been hidden. When Emma returned home, Margaret was seated at the dining table, lost in thought while sipping tea. The atmosphere felt charged as Emma approached her mother, holding tightly onto one of the articles she had found. "Mom," Emma said gently but firmly, "I need you to look at this." Margaret lifted her gaze from her cup and met Emma's eyes, sensing the gravity of the moment. "What is it?" Emma unfolded the newspaper article and laid it out before her mother. "Clara Johnson," she stated simply. "She died right before your wedding." Margaret's expression shifted instantly. Emma could see shadows dancing in her mother's eyes, pain mixed with something else that remained just out of reach. "I shouldn't have brought you into this," Margaret said quietly, looking down at the table as if avoiding eye contact could shield them both from further hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma pressed on. "Why hide what happened? It feels like there's so much more you haven't shared." Margaret sighed deeply, running a hand over her brow as if attempting to erase years of memories all at once. "Because it was too painful," she admitted softly. "Clara wasn't just a friend, we were like sisters." Emma's breath caught in her throat as realization swept over her. "So your life before me wasn't simple at all?" "No," Margaret replied slowly, tears glistening in her eyes as vulnerability seeped through her defenses. "I lost everything when I lost Clara. My future changed overnight. I thought by burying those memories deep down I could protect myself and you. But you've only created more pain by keeping those secrets," Emma said gently but firmly. "I need to understand what really happened." Margaret hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. It was clear this conversation would require them both to navigate uncharted waters together. "Clara was engaged to my first love," Margaret finally confessed, voice trembling slightly as though recalling distant echoes of heartbreak. "When I lost Clara, I felt I lost him too. My whole world crumbled around me. I made choices after that, choices I thought would keep me safe. Emma watched as tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks. It struck her how much pain lay beneath the surface, a lifetime of grief wrapped up in secrets kept tight for far too long. "I can't change what happened," Margaret continued sorrowfully, "but I can share my story if you're willing to listen." "I want to hear it all," Emma urged softly, feeling compassion fill the space where anger once resided. As they began to talk, layer by layer peeling back years of silence, Emma felt as though they were embarking on a journey together, one that would lead them through shadows into light and understanding. Family secrets no longer felt like burdens. Instead, they transformed into threads connecting them across generations, a rich tapestry woven with love and loss that shaped who they were today. In unraveling these secrets together, they weren't just confronting their pasts, they were crafting a future defined by honesty and connection, a chance for healing amidst shared sorrow and newfound understanding. With the weight of her mother's revelations still fresh in her mind, Emma felt an insatiable curiosity stirring within her. The photograph that had set this whole journey in motion now represented more than just a glimpse into her mother's past. It had become a portal to understanding the tangled web of relationships and events that shaped their family history. Emma was determined to uncover every detail. The next morning, she made a list of names, people who might have known her mother during those formative years captured in the photograph. The man beside Margaret, who remained unidentified, nagged at her thoughts. Who was he? What did he mean to her mother? As she picked up her phone, she dialed the number of Aunt Ruth, Margaret's sister and one of the few relatives who might shed light on the family's secrets. "Hi, Aunt Ruth," Emma said as soon as the call connected. "I hope you're doing well. I was hoping I could come by later today to talk." "Of course, darling. Is everything all right?" Ruth's voice was warm and inviting, but Emma sensed a hint of concern. "Yes, everything's fine," Emma replied, gathering her thoughts. "I just have some questions about Mom's past." "Sure thing. I'll have some cookies ready for you." After hanging up, Emma felt both excitement and apprehension swell within her. Would Aunt Ruth be willing to share what she knew? Would she have insights into the photograph that had ignited this entire exploration? Later that afternoon, Emma arrived at Aunt Ruth's cozy home, where the aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air. The two women settled into the sunlit kitchen, surrounded by memories, family pictures on the walls and mementos that told their own stories. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Ruth asked, pouring tea into delicate china cups. Emma took a deep breath before revealing the photograph. She laid it on the table between them. "I found this in the attic," she said, watching Ruth's expression closely. "Do you recognize this man?" Ruth leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the image. "Oh my! That looks like David," she exclaimed, surprise evident in her voice. "He was quite important to your mother back in the day." "Important? How so?" Emma pressed, leaning closer with anticipation. "He was your mother's first love," Aunt Ruth revealed slowly, as if each word carried immense weight. "They were inseparable during their teenage years. But when Clara died," her voice trailed off, emotion tightening her throat. Emma felt a jolt of realization. So David was more than just a friend. He had been intertwined with both Clara and Margaret's lives in ways she never imagined. "What happened after Clara died?" "The accident shattered them both," Ruth continued somberly. "Your mother had to pick up the pieces while mourning Clara's loss. David left town shortly after. It was too painful for him to stay." Emma absorbed this information, piecing together a narrative that contrasted sharply with what her mother had shared. Margaret had framed her life as uncomplicated post-Clara's death, yet here was evidence of profound emotional turmoil and unresolved grief. "What did Mom do after he left?" Emma asked. "She buried herself in work and eventually married your father," Aunt Ruth replied thoughtfully. "But she never really moved on from David. I think she chose to forget him as a way to protect herself." The revelation sent waves of emotions coursing through Emma. Her mother's choices suddenly felt more complicated than mere decisions. They were rooted in pain and heartache that hadn't fully healed. "Did Mom ever talk about David after they broke up?" Emma inquired further. "Not really," Ruth admitted with a wistful smile. "She always avoided the subject like it was a taboo. I think it hurt too much for her to revisit those memories." Emma felt an ache in her heart for both her mother and David, a love story interrupted by tragedy that seemed heavy with unfulfilled potential. As their conversation drifted into other family matters, Emma's mind kept returning to David and what his presence meant for understanding her mother's choices throughout life. She needed to know more about him, not just as a figure from the past but as someone who had shaped Margaret's world. After leaving Aunt Ruth's house with a bag full of cookies and a head filled with new insights, Emma decided it was time to seek out David himself if he were still alive. She knew his last name from Aunt Ruth's mention, David Reynolds, and quickly turned to social media in search of any leads. Hours passed as she scoured through profiles until finally stumbling upon a page that seemed promising, a man in his 60s with hints of familiarity in his features resembling those from the photograph. After contemplating for a moment, Emma mustered up the courage to send him a message introducing herself as Margaret's daughter and expressing her desire to learn more about their shared history. Days went by without a response, each tick of the clock amplifying Emma's anxiety until one fateful afternoon when a notification chimed on her phone. "David Reynolds has messaged you." Her heart raced as she opened the message eagerly. He expressed surprise at hearing from her but noted that he would be open to chatting about anything she wanted to discuss. They agreed to meet at a quaint cafe downtown, a neutral ground where stories could unfold over steaming cups of coffee. When Emma arrived at the cafe, nerves fluttered in her stomach like butterflies. This meeting felt monumental. She didn't just want answers but rather insight into her mother's heart and soul through someone who had once been so close to it all. As they sat across from each other at a small table adorned with flowers, Emma studied David closely. The lines on his face told tales of time well lived but also hinted at heartache from years gone by. "Thank you for meeting with me," Emma began tentatively before diving deeper into their conversation about Margaret, their shared histories intertwined like vines climbing an old wall waiting to bloom once more. As they talked about memories both joyous and painful, of laughter shared under summer skies and tears shed during moments of loss, Emma began to understand not only who David was but also how deeply he had impacted Margaret's life even if they hadn't ended up together. With each story exchanged and every laugh shared between them, Emma felt not just relief but also hope that through uncovering these connections buried beneath years of silence and sorrow could finally lead them all toward healing. A way forward defined by truth rather than hidden shadows. In this search for answers that started with one faded photograph emerged something far greater, an invitation into both understanding herself and embracing all aspects of those she loved, even the ones cloaked in complexity and sorrow. As part of their beautiful yet imperfect family tapestry woven over generations. The more Emma uncovered about her mother's past, the heavier the burden felt on her heart. With every revelation, a whirlwind of emotions swirled within her, betrayal, confusion, and an ache that seemed to settle deep in her bones. Each new piece added to the puzzle of her family history seemed to shift her understanding of herself and the very fabric of her identity. As she sat alone one evening in her room, the faint glow from a lamp casting soft shadows around her, Emma replayed the conversations she'd had with Aunt Ruth and David. They echoed in her mind like a haunting melody, beautiful yet laced with sorrow. The laughter they shared felt like a distant echo of a life she had never known, while the painful truths of Clara's death and her mother's hidden heartache loomed large in the background. It was as if she were standing at a precipice, looking down into a chasm filled with questions that threatened to consume her. Emma picked up the photograph again, the image of Margaret and David smiling, carefree in their youth. It was so starkly different from the woman she knew, it felt almost like a betrayal in itself. How had her mother managed to conceal this side of herself for so long? Each time Emma looked at the photograph, she felt an increasing sense of anger bubbling up within her, a simmering frustration directed not just at Margaret but also at the lies that had woven themselves into the fabric of their lives. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma whispered to herself, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She felt a sense of abandonment creeping in, as if all those years spent trusting her mother had been built on a foundation of sand instead of solid rock. The weight of secrets felt unbearable. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been living in a world shrouded by deception. The emotional turmoil was relentless. Every encounter with a family member or friend who knew nothing about Margaret's past felt like striking a nerve, an unspoken reminder that there were layers to who they were that had remained hidden under years of silence. Emma often found herself lost in thought, grappling with the notion that perhaps she didn't truly know her mother at all. At work, her colleagues noticed something was off. Emma often stared vacantly into space during meetings, distracted by thoughts that spiraled out of control. During lunch breaks, she would catch snippets of laughter from friends, their shared joys contrasting sharply with her own internal chaos. While they traded stories about weekend plans and family traditions, Emma struggled to connect, feeling like an outsider in her own life. One evening after work, feeling overwhelmed by everything she had discovered, Emma decided to go for a walk, hoping that fresh air would clear her mind. As she strolled through the familiar neighborhood streets, she couldn't help but reflect on how different everything felt now. Each house represented memories and connections that suddenly seemed tainted under the weight of new truths. Finding solace beneath the sprawling branches of an old oak tree in the park, Emma took a seat on a bench and let out a shaky breath. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through images on social media. The happy faces captured in moments frozen in time felt like sharp reminders of what she lacked: authenticity and connection. It was then that she stumbled upon an old family photo posted by Aunt Ruth, a gathering filled with laughter and joy. In it stood Margaret, radiant and joyful, flanked by Clara and David. The trio looked undeniably close. The sight ripped through Emma like a jagged blade. It was beautiful yet painfully bittersweet. "Why couldn't you just tell me?" Emma murmured aloud as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Why did you have to hide all this?" The emotional upheaval within her felt insurmountable. How could she reconcile the woman who raised her with this complex history full of love and loss? She wanted to confront Margaret again, to demand answers, but fear gripped her heart. What if diving deeper into these truths only revealed more pain? What if knowing more about Clara and David meant losing even more of her mother? As dusk settled over the park, casting long shadows across the ground, Emma felt utterly lost, caught between wanting to understand everything about her mother's past while grappling with feelings of betrayal for having been kept in the dark for so long. Returning home that night was no easier. Stepping through the front door felt akin to crossing back into another world, a world where things seemed ordinary but now felt charged with secrets waiting just beneath the surface. When she saw Margaret sitting quietly in the living room reading a book, guilt twisted within Emma along with anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma blurted out without preamble as she dropped onto the couch across from Margaret. Margaret looked up from her book, surprise etched on her face. "Emma, you've lied to me my whole life." Emma continued, emotion spilling over as frustration boiled inside her. "You made it sound like everything was simple when it wasn't. How could you keep all this from me?" Margaret's expression shifted from surprise to concern as she set aside her book and leaned forward. "I didn't mean to lie," she said softly but firmly. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Emma echoed incredulously. "How is living in ignorance protecting me? I feel like I don't even know who you are." "I thought we shared everything." "We do share everything," Margaret replied earnestly. "But some memories are too painful to relive." Emma shook her head vehemently, tears streamed down her cheeks as raw emotions poured forth unfiltered. "You're right, they're painful. But hiding them doesn't change what happened. All it does is create more distance between us." The air thickened with tension as they faced each other, two women caught in an emotional storm fueled by decades-old secrets and unexpressed love. "I'm sorry if you feel betrayed," Margaret said quietly, genuine regret coloring her tone. "I thought keeping these things buried would protect you from heartbreak." Emma took a deep breath before responding. She needed clarity rather than defensiveness. "But instead you've created your own prison, one that I'm trapped in now too." In that moment, amidst their shared pain and vulnerability lay an opportunity for healing, a chance to break free from familial cycles wrapped tightly around both their hearts. As they sat together enveloped by silence punctuated only by quiet sobs and shaky breaths over unspoken words exchanged between them, that night marked not just another chapter but an invitation for both women to step outside their comfort zones and confront their truth together, even if it meant facing emotional turmoil head-on without any safety nets left to catch them along the way. The tension between Emma and her mother had reached a boiling point, but rather than shying away from it, Emma felt an urgency to delve deeper into the tangled web of her mother's past. The photograph of Margaret and David, combined with Aunt Ruth's revelations about Clara, had left her with an insatiable hunger for understanding. Emma needed to piece together the threads of their family's history, not just for herself but for the sake of repairing the fragile bond with her mother. Determined to learn more, Emma decided to dig further into the stories surrounding Clara and David. She recalled that David had mentioned his childhood home was not far from where she lived now. If he were willing, perhaps a visit could unearth even more hidden truths. With a sense of purpose, she reached out to him again, asking if he would be open to a visit. "Of course," he replied warmly. "I'd be happy to share more about Clara and your mother. It's been a long time since I've thought about those days." The meeting was set for the following Saturday at his house, a quaint little place filled with charm and memories. As Emma drove to David's home, anticipation mixed with anxiety churned in her stomach. She wanted answers but feared what those answers might reveal. When she arrived, David greeted her with a warm smile and led her into his living room, which was adorned with photographs that told stories of a life well lived. After settling into a comfortable chair, Emma wasted no time in steering the conversation toward the past. "I'd like to know more about my mom and your relationship," she stated directly. "What was it like back then?" David took a moment to reflect before answering. "Your mother and I were inseparable during our teenage years," he began slowly as nostalgia washed over him. "We shared dreams, laughter, and even heartaches. But when Clara died, everything changed." Emma leaned in closer, eager to grasp every detail. What happened after that? David looked pained as he continued. Clara was not just a friend, she was Margaret's closest confidant, like a sister. Losing her devastated both of us. He paused. Emma could see the weight of those memories pressing down on him. I remember the day Clara died vividly, he said quietly. We were supposed to go to her wedding rehearsal that evening. Instead, I received a call about the accident. She never made it. Emma's heart sank at the thought of that tragic day, the what-if swirling around in her mind like storm clouds. How did Mom cope? She tried to keep moving forward, David replied softly. But it wasn't easy for either of us. For months after Clara's death, Margaret withdrew into herself. We lost touch soon after. I couldn't bear to see her like that. Emma felt an ache in her chest as she absorbed this revelation. It explained so much about Margaret's life choices, her reluctance to revisit old wounds and her desire to bury anything that reminded her of pain. But why didn't you stay in touch? Emma asked gently. I thought it was best for both of us, David admitted regretfully. I hoped she would find happiness without me, a fresh start without the memories tied to our past together. Emma pondered his words carefully. They resonated deeply within her. The loss had shaped not just Margaret but everyone connected to Clara, decisions born from heartache that rippled through generations. Did Mom ever talk about you after you left? Emma asked hesitantly. David shook his head sadly. Not really. I think she believed moving on meant letting go completely of me and all we had shared. As they continued talking, Emma sensed the depth of their connection, the love they had once held for each other now tinged with sadness and regret. It became clear how deeply rooted their shared history was and how its impact reverberated through time. Eventually, Emma decided it was time to address something that had weighed heavily on her mind since she first saw the photograph. What did you think when my mom married someone else? David hesitated, his expression clouding with emotion as he searched for words. Honestly? I was heartbroken but also relieved, he confessed quietly. I wanted Margaret to find happiness again, even if it wasn't with me. Emma considered this a bittersweet acknowledgement that love can take many forms and lead people down different paths based on life's trials and tribulations. Do you still think about her? Emma asked cautiously. All the time, David admitted earnestly as his gaze drifted toward an old photograph on the wall, one featuring him with both Clara and Margaret during happier days. But I respect that she has moved on. I want what's best for her. With each story David shared, Emma felt pieces of the puzzle click into place, a clearer picture emerging not only of Margaret's past but also how it intersected with hers in ways she hadn't fully understood before. As their conversation drew to a close, Emma sensed an overwhelming wave of empathy washing over her. Understanding blossomed where anger had once festered within her heart toward her mother's choices. Thank you for sharing this with me, Emma said sincerely as she prepared to leave David's home. She felt lighter somehow, as if shedding layers of confusion allowed space for growth. You're welcome, David replied warmly, offering genuine support in their shared quest for understanding. Just remember that love can be messy, it doesn't always fit neatly into our expectations. Driving home later that evening, Emma reflected on everything she had learned, the complexity of relationships intertwined in love and loss, and how they shaped not only Margaret's choices but also who Emma had become as a person. As she walked through the front door of her home, she felt ready to confront her mother once more, not just with questions but also a newfound compassion stemming from understanding the weight behind each choice made long ago. The revelation of these truths brought clarity amidst chaos, a chance for healing through connection rather than conflict, a bridge built over shared history rather than hidden secrets waiting beneath silence's veil. With resolve coursing through her veins, Emma sought out Margaret once more, ready at last to share what she had uncovered while inviting honesty back into their lives as they navigated this new chapter together. One defined by love instead of lies, unraveling at last towards reconciliation between mother and daughter alike. The days that followed Emma's revelations felt heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Having pieced together fragments of her mother's past, Emma was left grappling with a mix of anger, confusion, and empathy. She had finally begun to understand the depths of Margaret's choices, yet the strain on their relationship felt more palpable than ever. Emma found herself retreating into her thoughts more often. She would sit in her room, staring at the photograph of Margaret and David, lost in contemplation. The image was now imbued with so much meaning, yet it also represented a chasm between them, a gap filled with secrets that had shaped their lives for far too long. Every time she passed by her mother in the hallway or sat across from her at the dinner table, the air crackled with tension. Conversations felt stilted, strained by the weight of everything left unsaid. One evening, after a particularly awkward dinner where silence stretched painfully between them, Emma decided it was time to confront her mother once more. She could no longer bear the emotional distance that had crept into their home. With a deep breath, she approached Margaret, who was tidying up dishes in the kitchen. "Mom," Emma began hesitantly, "we need to talk about everything that's happened." Margaret paused and turned to face her daughter, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. "I know things have been difficult lately," she replied softly, "but I thought we were making progress." "Progress?" Emma echoed incredulously. "How can we make progress if we're both still tiptoeing around each other? I feel like there are walls between us." Margaret sighed deeply, leaning against the counter as if searching for strength. "I didn't mean to build a wall," she said quietly. "It's just sharing my past is hard for me." "I understand that," Emma said gently but firmly. "But your past is part of who you are, and it's part of who I am too. If we want to move forward together, we need to be honest about everything, the good and the bad." Margaret looked down at the floor for a moment before meeting Emma's gaze again. "You have every right to feel betrayed," she admitted, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wish I had been braver enough to share my truth with you sooner." The vulnerability in her mother's voice tugged at Emma's heartstrings, but anger still simmered beneath the surface. "What hurts is knowing you've been hiding so much from me," she confessed. "You made choices based on fear rather than love, choices that affected our entire family." "I didn't want you to carry my burdens," Margaret replied defensively. "I thought keeping my past hidden would protect you from pain. But instead you've created more pain." Emma exclaimed, frustration tightening around her chest like a vice. "You've made me question our relationship and what it means to be honest with each other." Silence hung heavily between them as they both grappled with their emotions, the love they shared now interwoven with distrust and disappointment. "Honestly, Mom," Emma continued softly, trying to rein in her emotions, "I feel like I don't know you anymore. The woman I thought I knew seems so different from the one who kept all these secrets." Margaret stepped back slightly as if Emma's words struck her like a physical blow. Vulnerability washed over her expression as she took a shaky breath. "I never wanted that for us," Margaret whispered. "I just thought if I buried my past deep enough, maybe it wouldn't hurt either of us. But it did hurt us." Emma insisted gently but firmly. "It's changed how I see you and how I see myself." In that moment, they both realized how deeply intertwined their emotions were. Love tinged with betrayal and longing for connection overshadowed by fear of vulnerability. "I want to rebuild our relationship," Emma said earnestly. "But we need to start from a place of honesty, no more hiding." Margaret nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks as she wiped them away hastily. "You're right," she conceded softly. "I'm willing to share whatever you want to know, whatever it takes to heal this rift between us." Emma felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Perhaps this was the breakthrough they both needed, a path toward rebuilding trust and understanding. As they sat down together on the couch that evening, an unspoken agreement hung in the air. They would embark on this journey together, one defined not by secrets but by openness and honesty. "Let's start from the beginning," Emma suggested gently. "Tell me about your life before Clara died, what it was like being with David, and how losing Clara affected everything." Margaret looked hesitant for a moment but then took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead, a willingness to face uncomfortable truths for the sake of their bond. "It was chaotic yet beautiful," she began slowly, recalling memories buried beneath layers of grief. "David and I were so young and full of hope. But then Clara's death shattered us both." As Margaret spoke about those years filled with laughter and heartache, of dreams shared alongside fears realized, Emma listened intently. Each story added depth to understanding both her mother and herself. Through tears and laughter mixed in equal measure, they navigated stories thick with emotion, a tapestry woven through shared experiences now revealed without filters or facades. In those moments spent peeling back layers of pain and joy alike, Emma realized that while their relationship had been strained by secrets, the foundation built on love remained strong. Though the road ahead would surely continue presenting challenges, this newfound openness marked not just healing but also hope for brighter days ahead. A chance for mother and daughter alike to redefine their relationship amid complexities woven intricately between them through time itself. As honesty began to fill spaces once occupied by fear, their connection grew resilient, not simply as family but as two souls seeking understanding within the depths of each other's hearts. A journey worth embarking upon despite its inherent risks along this winding path toward reconciliation. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the living room shifted from one of tension to something softer, more hopeful. Emma and her mother sat together on the couch, the remnants of their earlier confrontation giving way to an earnest conversation. The weight of unspoken truths began to lift as they delved deeper into their shared history, each story revealing layers of complexity that shaped both their lives. Margaret's voice trembled slightly as she recounted the day Clara had died, the shock, the disbelief, and the overwhelming grief that had enveloped her like a dark cloud. Emma listened intently, feeling a mixture of compassion and sorrow for the young woman who had loved fiercely and lost deeply. She began to see her mother not just as a parent but as a person with vulnerabilities and struggles, someone who had faced pain head-on yet felt compelled to shield her daughter from it. "I thought I could protect you by keeping my past buried," Margaret admitted, tears shimmering in her eyes. "But in doing so, I only created distance between us. I never meant for you to feel betrayed." Emma felt a pang of empathy for her mother. She understood now that Margaret's intentions, though misguided, stemmed from love. "I know you didn't want to hurt me," she replied softly, "but hiding your truth made it hard for me to trust you. I felt like I didn't really know you." Margaret nodded slowly, the weight of realization settling between them like a fragile bridge waiting to be crossed. "I've carried this burden for so long," she confessed. "And while I thought I was protecting you, I realize now that I was only prolonging my own pain." Emma reached out and grasped her mother's hand, feeling warmth radiate between them, a connection they had almost lost amid silence and secrets. "We can't change what happened in the past," Emma said gently, "but we can choose how we move forward." The sincerity in Emma's voice struck a chord in Margaret's heart. In that moment, she knew they were at a crossroads, an opportunity for healing that neither of them could afford to ignore. "Forgiveness isn't easy," Margaret said quietly, looking down at their intertwined fingers. "It takes time and understanding." "I know," Emma replied thoughtfully, "but I'm willing to try." As they sat together in silence for a moment, both women reflected on the complexities of human experiences, the way love and loss intertwined into something beautiful yet painful all at once. They were navigating uncharted waters, but there was a sense of calmness enveloping them both, grounding their resolve. "Mom," Emma began cautiously after a pause, "do you think we can rebuild our relationship? Can we learn to trust each other again?" Margaret looked up, her expression filled with hope and vulnerability. "I want that more than anything," she said earnestly. "But it will take work from both of us." "I'm ready to put in that work," Emma declared, feeling an unwavering determination rise within her. "We can create new memories together, ones built on honesty." Margaret smiled through her tears, relief washing over her features as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you for being so understanding," she said softly. "I promise to be open with you about everything moving forward. I'll share my memories and my mistakes. And I promise to listen without judgment," Emma replied firmly. "We're in this together." In that moment of resolution, a new chapter began, a chance for both women to embrace forgiveness while acknowledging the complexities of their individual journeys. They understood that healing wouldn't happen overnight. There would still be moments of discomfort and uncertainty ahead, but now they were equipped with newfound tools, empathy, and understanding. As the conversation continued into the night, laughter punctuated their exchanges, a refreshing reminder that joy could still exist alongside sorrow. They reminisced about shared memories while also creating space for new stories, each one weaving threads into the fabric of their evolving relationship. Gradually, they made plans together, weekend outings to explore new places or simple movie nights filled with popcorn and laughter, little moments designed intentionally to nurture their bond as mother and daughter. In this process of healing, Emma learned not only about forgiveness but also about embracing imperfections within themselves and recognizing that everyone carries burdens shaped by choices made in times of pain or fear. As weeks turned into months following that pivotal night on the couch, their relationship blossomed into something deeper than either had anticipated, a connection fortified by honesty rather than hidden truths. One afternoon, while sorting through family photos together, laughter echoed through the room as they stumbled upon old snapshots from Emma's childhood. The joy radiating between them felt palpable. "So many wonderful memories here," Emma remarked fondly as she held up an image capturing her mother's youthful smile surrounded by friends at a park picnic. Margaret chuckled softly in return. "I may have been young then, but those days were filled with happiness despite everything else happening behind closed doors." "Just like now," Emma replied thoughtfully. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that while life would continue presenting challenges, their hearts were more open now than ever before, ready to embrace each moment fully together as they navigated this beautiful journey called life. In learning to forgive one another for past mistakes, their bond grew stronger, infused with resilience and newfound hope igniting their shared path ahead. One filled not only with love but also grace amidst life's complexities woven intricately into family histories passed down through generations, still blooming brightly today. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across Emma's room, she found herself lost in thought, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The photograph that had ignited a cascade of revelations now sat framed on her desk, transformed into a symbol of growth and understanding. It held not just memories of her mother's past, but also the key to her own evolving identity. Emma leaned back in her chair, allowing herself to drift through the events of the past few months, the confrontations, the discoveries, the moments of pain and joy shared with her mother. Each experience had shaped her perceptions not only of Margaret but also of herself. She realized how much she had grown through this process. The emotional upheaval had forced her to confront difficult truths and embrace the complexities of human relationships. Understanding Margaret's past had been a double-edged sword. On one hand, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of empathy for the woman who had raised her, the young girl who once loved freely yet had been shattered by loss and grief. On the other hand, she grappled with feelings of betrayal for having lived under a veil of secrets for so long. Yet, through it all, Emma discovered that both love and hurt could coexist. They were intricately woven into the fabric of family life. In reflecting on her journey, Emma recognized that uncovering the truth about her mother had challenged her own identity. She was no longer just Margaret's daughter, living in a world defined by half-truths. She was a young woman navigating the complexities of her heritage, a tapestry rich with stories of love, loss, and resilience. This newfound awareness allowed Emma to connect more deeply with her own emotions, acknowledging that she too carried burdens shaped by experiences outside her control. With every conversation she shared with Margaret, every laugh over dinner or late-night chat about life, Emma felt their bond strengthen. They began to rewrite their history together, not as a narrative marred by deception but as one rooted in honesty and vulnerability. In doing so, Emma learned that relationships flourished when nurtured with truth. They became spaces where pain could be transformed into understanding. As she gazed at the photograph again, the smiles captured on that fateful day, Emma understood that each person in it had their own story intertwined with hers. Clara's absence was felt deeply. She was not just a tragic figure from the past but an essential part of their family narrative, a reminder of lost potential and unfulfilled dreams. Yet Clara's memory also served as a guiding light for both Emma and Margaret, a testament to the power of love that transcended time and tragedy. Emma picked up a journal that lay nearby, deciding to put pen to paper. Writing had always been a way for her to process thoughts and emotions and now felt like an important step toward solidifying everything she had learned. She began to write about her journey, how discovering the photograph led to uncovering truths that reshaped her understanding of family dynamics. With each word penned down, she felt a sense of catharsis wash over her. Understanding my mother's past has changed me, she wrote thoughtfully. It has taught me that our identities are never static, they are shaped by our experiences and how we choose to navigate them. She paused for a moment, considering how meaningful it was to embrace complexity rather than shy away from it. Through this process of reflection, she recognized that everyone carried stories marked by both light and shadow. Those pieces stitched together formed identities uniquely their own. As she continued writing, Emma reflected on how vital honesty had become in her relationship with Margaret. They were no longer bound by silence. Instead, they were forging forward together, a path illuminated by transparency and authenticity. She realized that while they would continue to face challenges as they rebuilt their bond, there was strength in vulnerability. Life is beautifully messy, Emma continued in her journal entry. It is filled with moments that test our resolve but also remind us of our capacity for love and forgiveness. With each stroke of her pen, Emma acknowledged how crucial it was to honor both joy and sorrow. That balance was what made their family unique. She could see now that embracing both sides allowed for deeper connections not only within herself but also in relationships with others outside her family. As night fell and stars began to twinkle overhead like small beacons in the dark sky, Emma closed her journal feeling lighter than before, but more importantly, empowered by what lay ahead. Understanding the intricacies within herself led to acceptance, not just of Margaret's choices but also of who she wanted to become moving forward. With renewed clarity surrounding her identity, rooted firmly in truth rather than illusion, Emma looked forward to creating new memories with her mother, ones built on compassion rather than fear. Ones where laughter echoed through their home alongside unspoken histories finally laid bare beneath layers long hidden away. The photograph would remain on her desk, a cherished reminder that while life may be fraught with challenges, embracing complexity led them closer together as they navigated this adventure called life side by side. Together rewriting their story anew while celebrating all its beautiful imperfections along the way.